that was fighting for gay rights, and people were killed.
Nobody was killed at Stonewall.
Nobody was killed.
There are subtle ways in which we've started to see production no longer caring about what the fan base has to say when it comes to the series. And yes, there has been moments where critiques from viewers are clearly listened to and we're given the kind of content that people have been asking for. Over the years, there's been a noticeable shift in tone. It's not just the usual backlash that comes from viewers being unhappy with a particular outcome. It's something beyond that. In many cases, even when a large portion of the audience shares the same stance, production seems to go in the opposite direction. Whether that's crowning certain queens, keeping or removing specific challenges, or changing formats willy-nilly, it's become a recurring pattern. For this video, I made a post asking you all, what do you think are some of the signs that production is ignoring fan requests? I've gone through all your responses and compiled them into this video for a concise rundown. With that in mind, I wanted to go over some of the red flags that have appeared recently and how the show is produced versus how it's received publicly. The goal of this is to pinpoint the weak elements of the show and explore how, if they were fixed or improved, they would lead to much stronger overall seasons. As we go through this list, if you agree with any of the points, leave a comment below. That being said, let's hear a message from today's sponsor. Before we go any further, I have a bet for you, and it's that honestly, I think Squarespace can build you a website faster than you can build furniture. This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the no-stress platform that helps you build a great-looking website without all the usual tech headaches. You get everything on one spot: your domain, beautiful design tools, built-in payments, analytics, and more. When I first tried it, I expected a learning curve, but it was actually super intuitive. I picked a template, dragged a few things around, and suddenly it looked like something I'd actually want to show people. No coding, no panicking, just vibes. And here's the feature I didn't realize I needed: the analytics dashboard. It shows you exactly where your traffic's coming from, what's working, what's not, all in real time. It's super helpful if you're selling something or just trying to grow your audience without guessing what people care about. So if there's something you've been thinking of launching, maybe a project, a store, or a portfolio, take this as your sign to finally do it. Click the link in the description below and head to Squarespace to start your free trial. And when you're ready to launch, you'll get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now, let's begin. The first set of examples reflects how production is directly ignoring the fanbase. One thing time has proven is that when it comes to what the fanbase thinks, it's often very messy. So it makes sense that production sometimes chooses to stick to its guns rather than give in to public pressure, especially with decisions like crowning a winner. That being said, while it's true that 100% of viewers will never agree on who the deserving queen is, in recent years, it's reached the point where the contestants with overwhelming fan support is often ignored in favor of someone less popular. Of course, this doesn't mean that a winner should be crowned purely because they're a fan favorite. They still need to have performed well across the competition. However, two of the most commonly cited examples are the crownings of Ginger Minj and Alyssa Edwards. Now, this shouldn't need to be said, but both queens are absolutely deserving winners and are the official title holders. Their achievements are not up for debate. The discussion here is more about the lack of clear, coherent reasoning that some fans felt surrounding their wins. In both All-Stars 10 and Global All-Stars, a major criticism for viewers was that it felt like everything was being structured towards Ginger and Alyssa winning. And as the episodes unfolded, while both did perform well, it wasn't without a number of questionable production decisions that seemed to benefit them along the way. Regardless, production had the opportunity in both cases to do something different: crown the fan favorite instead. Doing so would have achieved two things. First of all, it would have challenged the narrative that the show was rigged towards a predetermined winner. And second, it could have helped rebuild the trust between production and the fan base, while at the same time potentially preventing those seasons from being remembered so negatively. It's important to note though that these are two very isolated examples, and it doesn't mean that production should always blindly go with whichever finalist happens to be the fan favorite and crown them. If that was the case, then in season 17, Jules Sparkles would have won over Anya Nerve, since Jules had a large portion of online fan support. However, it still made sense to crown Anya in season 17 despite her being the less popular queen. queen. Anya had genuinely performed well throughout the season. She won a significant number of challenges and carried a level of confidence and nerve, pun intended, that made her feel like a clear winner in a season with a lot of inconsistency elsewhere. Additionally, the debate around season 17 felt more like the usual annual fan discussion we see every year, especially since Anya also had a strong base of supporters herself. In other words, this wasn't a clear-cut divide. It was a relatively balanced split in my opinion. That's very different from situations like Ginger versus Georges or Alyssa versus Nolania, where it felt like far more of an extreme discrepancy. In those cases, you're talking about roughly 90% of the fan base supporting one queen versus 10% supporting the other. Meanwhile, Anya versus Jules felt much closer to something like a 60-40 split. So while disagreement is normal, the scale of disagreement in those other examples is what made them feel so much more significant. Another request that fans have been making is to bring back grand finales. Drag Race introduced the concept of a live grand finale back in 2012 with season 4. From that moment, a tradition was set. At the end of every season, all the queens would gather one last time to showcase themselves in their most glamorous outfits. Not only that, but grand finales also gave past alumni a chance to attend, walk red carpets, do interviews, and sometimes even make a cameo appearance sitting in the audience. All of these elements helped make the finales feel special. They weren't just a conclusion to the season, they were the culmination of everything. Fans got to give the queens a proper send-off, while the queens themselves got to walk into a packed theater of screaming Drag Race fans, being cheered in what was often one of their most extravagant looks of the season. It served as a true goodbye to one of the most life-changing experiences of their life. On top of that, production usually did whatever it took to make it happen, even when circumstances changed. Season 11 was the last finale held before the pandemic, and season 12 was the first to not have a live grand finale, and instead doing it over Zoom, which made complete sense at the time. However, the very next year with season 13, even though the pandemic was still ongoing, they still went ahead and rented out a theater, hosting a finale with just the top 4 queens and no audience. Though there were fans outside of the venue, which is a detail worth noting. By season 14, the pandemic stigma had largely faded, and they hosted the grand finale at the Vegas Live residency. So by season 15, it felt like things were finally back to normal. That's why it came to such a shock when, starting with season 16, the grand finale was no longer included. At first, many assumed this was due to the actors' strike in Hollywood, with production possibly being worried it could affect reality TV production as well, though it ultimately didn't. That's why, going into season 17, fans expected grand finales to return, but they didn't. Since then, viewers have been very vocal online about wanting them back, as it doesn't really make sense for them to be removed entirely. But despite all the loud complaints, for season 18, they still went ahead with not having a grand finale. Moving on, another topic that was brought up is the lack of effort when it comes to producing Untucked. To give credit where it's due, World of Wonder did do a complete rebrand of Untucked with season 17, where they created a new backstage setup, gave the queens more space with multiple seating areas scattered throughout, and of course added snacks. In season 18, they even introduced a small extra room where a pair of queens can step away and gossip. All of this was very refreshing at first, but it actually became stale pretty quick. The solution here feels fairly simple. They need to go all out with Untucked and bring it back closer to a modern reimagining of the original format that made it so popular in the first place. That means creating a set of different rooms, similar to the Interior Illusions Lounge. It would obviously need a new name, but that's the idea. The core concept for this is that queens need properly enclosed spaces where they can feel safe enough to actually let their guard down. While the current set does allow them to move beyond just sitting on a couch, along with the addition of a small private room, is a step in the right direction, but it still isn't enough to create a real separation or privacy. If you gave them multiple rooms and actively split the cast into different groups, you'd immediately get more dynamic interactions. On top of that, introduce structured games that naturally create tension, like having one group rank the other half of the cast and then revealing those rankings. It would be able to push drama and storylines forward in a very organic way. Finally, hire editors who are actually focused on shaping Untucked into a narrative-driven companion piece to the main series, instead of of just backstage filler. This would all go a long way into bringing back Untucked into the forefront. Up next, we have the Makeover Challenge problem. Specifically, Michelle Visage's inconsistency when it comes to what she considers drag family resemblance. At first, it seemed like something you could still argue was fair, since it was ultimately Michelle's opinion. However, over the course of multiple seasons, viewers have started to notice that there doesn't seem to be a consistent standard for what actually qualifies as a successful makeover. Michelle has critiqued pairs for not matching closely enough in color, saying that it breaks the sense of family resemblance. But then she has also critiqued pairs who do match in color, saying that she still doesn't see the resemblance. It becomes genuinely confusing to the point where it's hard to pin down what the expectation even is. At this point, it almost feels like the queens are expected to create a literal clone of themselves just to satisfy the criteria. Because otherwise, how are they supposed to consistently meet a standard that keeps shifting? Now, as I was going through all the comments that you guys left, one that really stood out to me was the criticism around casting choices for the main seasons. For starters, season 17 was heavily critiqued for featuring a cast of younger queens who, in many viewers' eyes, didn't have enough experience and struggled across a lot of the challenges. So, for season 18, production shifted and cast older queens, with most of them being in their 30s, compared to season 17's where most of them were in their 20s. However, season 18 still resulted in what many considered to be a fairly weak season. This suggested that the issue wasn't simply the age of the queens. It was that production was consistently selecting contestants who didn't necessarily have the experience, personality, or skill set needed to deliver what viewers expected from a main season. Now, you might argue that after nearly 20 editions, there just aren't as many queens left to carry the same level of legacy drag we saw in the earlier years of the franchise. But that excuse doesn't really hold up. There are plenty of experienced established queens out there. For example, Safira Cristal had been applying since around season 4 or 5 and only got cast in season 16, where she immediately flourished. In recent years, well-known names like Fantasia Royale Gaga and Giselle Barbie Royale have all auditioned for season 17 or 18, but ultimately were not selected, despite the final cast including contestants that many fans questioned in comparison. This raises a pretty clear question. Why is this happening? Well, Drag Race is still a reality competition show, which likely means production is casting around specific archetypes that they want to fill. For example, 2 fashion girls, 2 big girls, 1 alternative queen, a couple of lip sync assassin types, and so on. The result is that queens are sometimes being placed into predetermined roles to recreate dynamics from previous seasons, rather than being chosen purely on overall star potential. And that formula is just not working anymore. At this point, it might be more effective to cast a season based entirely on star power, queens that they genuinely believe could make it all the way to the end, rather than intentionally including early outs or filler archetypes just to balance out the narrative. Other casting criticisms include the lack of drag kings. Fans have been asking for years to see drag kings compete, but it still hasn't happened, at least on the main seasons hosted by RuPaul. On top of that, there's also been very limited representation of cis women and trans men, with only a handful ever appearing on Drag Race. Expanding casting in these directions could introduce fresh dynamics and perspectives that both the audience and the queens in the room aren't used to. Another criticism is that overall, production's efforts need to improve. There's been a noticeable lack of effort not just in the content of the seasons themselves, but also in everything surrounding them. As you know, while Drag Race used to consistently win Emmys year after year, the past few seasons haven't been as successful when it comes to taking home the major awards, with RuPaul even losing Best Reality TV host to Alan Cummings several years in a row. To put this into context, Drag Race's Emmy success really began around 2016 to 2017. But even by 2019, when they would all go up to accept the awards, it was mostly producers and staff on stage, with no queens from the actual seasons present. That shifted in 2021, when RuPaul appeared on the red carpet alongside Simone and Gottmik from season 13, the current airing season at the time, and they ultimately went on stage together to accept the award. At that point, it felt like momentum was building. By the 2022 Emmys, production doubled down on this idea and invited a bunch of the season 14 cast to attend the red carpet, giving the queens more visibility and exposure. It genuinely felt like the show was expanding opportunities for its newest contestants beyond the competition itself, even if it was just through award show appearances. However, season 14 did not end up winning Outstanding Reality TV competition. Fast forward to the 2023 Emmys, and season 15 had almost its entire cast attend the red carpet, with Princess Poppy becoming one of the most talked about looks of the night. That year culminated in Drag Race winning Outstanding Reality Competition program, which is to this day its most recent win in the category. In 2024, RuPaul lost Best Reality Host to Alan Cummings for the first time, and it feels like the tone shifted after that. By 2025, Ru didn't even bother to attend the red carpet at all, leaving the season 17 cast to attend it alone alongside Michelle Visage and the other judges. We've also seen a similar shift in other promotional opportunities, like the MTV VMAs. In 2024, almost the entire cast of season 16 attended the VMAs, but by season 17, it was limited mainly to the top 4, along with a few alumni from earlier seasons. Overall, it felt like the push to place new queens into major red carpet moments and Hollywood events started to lose momentum once the show stopped consistently bringing home major awards. The next issue brought up by fans is how not only DragCon LA and DragCon UK were cancelled indefinitely, but fans never even received any closure because World of Wonder never released a statement explaining why a new DragCon had not been announced. Despite being a yearly tradition that the franchise worked hard to build into the fabric of the fan base as a space where everyone could come together to celebrate the queens, DragCon LA was suddenly never announced in 2025. While the public tried to make sense of it, pointing to possible reasons like the LA fires or even the political climate under Trump, we still never received any official communication from World of Wonder. Then, a few months later, fans were also forced to come to the conclusion that DragCon UK would also no longer be happening either. This behavior comes across as a lack of respect from World of Wonder's side to not at least make a simple statement acknowledging that DragCon couldn't continue at this time, or at the very least confirm whether we should have any expectation for it to return in the future. Moving on, another area people brought to my attention was the noticeable drop in effort when it came to the promotional rollout of each season. Even the Meet the Queen videos have started to feel stale. The solution to this is that they need to spice them up by bringing in former alumni to interact with and interview the new queens, or at the very least stop asking the same repetitive questions every single year, like how would you describe the season in one word? Instead, let the queens have actual conversations that show off their personalities, rather than filling the interviews with forgettable nothing burger questions where only 2 or 3 members of the cast end up having memorable moments. So there you have it. At the end of the day, RuPaul's Drag Race is a series we all love, and this video comes from a place of wanting to see production move in a direction that consistently delivers the highest quality seasons possible. That brings me to the question: what changes would you like to see production make? Leave your suggestions in the comment below. Maybe someone involved with the show will end up seeing them. And if not, let me know which points from this video you agreed with the most. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave this a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys next time. So if there's something you've been thinking of launching, maybe a project, a store, or a portfolio, take this as your sign to finally do it. Click the link in the description below and head to Squarespace to start your free trial. And when you're ready to launch, you'll get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Take a moment to thank my patrons. In the Elite Pink Squad, we have Matthew Burns, Gay Uncle, Sari Tish, Las Potitas, Cool Gal Nan, Jet Sam Adams, and Natasha De Leon. And in the Gay Squad, we have Lone Resident, Christine Gregory. And in the Green Squad, we have Cayman Rider Furry, Edgar Allan Pup, The Only Sean, IJS, Not a Punch, But a Keek, Jack Beck, Galeria Gomez, Sarah G, Scarlet Rose, Boiled Peanut, Not an Omelet, But an Egg, Max Whale, Dea, Dea, and Niall O'Hearain. If you'd like to see your name on the screen, you can support me on Patreon. The link will be in the description. I'll see you guys next time.